Hi and welcome. My name is Ephraim and this is the Bear Yourself podcast. Today's podcast is with the the Minister for Veteran Affairs, Johnny Mercer. I was fortunate to meet Johnny recently at the Festival of Remembrance or around the Festival of Remembrance, and he's very kindly offered to come and talk to me about various things, obviously some of which have had a huge impact on me and the loss of my son or our son James in Afghanistan in 2013. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy what Johnny's got to say. He's had a genuinely really interesting life and career, and I hope you enjoy the podcast, and thanks for watching. Johnny Mercer, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
We met briefly recently at the Remembrance or the Festival of Remembrance build-up, and thank you for offering to come and have a chat with us on the podcast here on behalf of Strongmen. Thank you. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about you, really, and start with some basic stuff. What does an MP do? What's your sort of daily routine now you're a big grown up in a suit? What is an average day?
Oh, look, the truth is there's no average day, right? So you kind of got overlaying and overlapping responsibilities. Your constituency MP, so you're elected by your constituents, roughly 70,000 of them, 80,000 of them in your hometown or county or wherever it may be. And you're here primarily to represent them. But clearly you have other duties as well. And I'm also a government minister. I'm a cabinet minister. And I'm responsible for the UK's Veterans Affairs. So when I'm in London, generally speaking, I'm either working on that or supporting the government in its programme for government, whether it's bringing in legislation, whether it's winning votes in the House, whatever it may be, to make sure that government can occur and governing can happen. So generally up here sort of Monday to Thursday night to go back to Plymouth. And then Friday and Saturday I'll be in Plymouth, and then Sunday I'll spend a bit of time with my kids, and then the whole thing starts again. So yeah, it's pretty relentless, I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty hard work, but at the same time a sort of deep privilege to be able to represent all those great people who live in a city that I've called home for 20 years now.
And in terms of for your own personal well-being and how you look after yourself, commuting can be a bit of a pain, and obviously eating Greggs and whatever can be a bit of a pain as well. So how do you look after yourself? I mean, you're a veteran as well, which usually means there's some form of physical exercise. Is something you like to do you manage when you're up there to do that sort of thing, or is it a case of wishing you would be able to do more of that?
Well, interestingly, I mean, I'm slightly going through a transition on this at the moment. So previously I've been absolutely religious about going out and thrashing myself in London. And I found that as a really good way of sort of coping mentally with quite a lot of stress. But as I've done that, I've realised like how much that makes you eat, and how much sort of crap you end up eating as well. Because obviously you can't just eat good West Country vegetables in London. You end up buying all sorts of rubbish. And so I'm trying actually to go through a transition where I do less fizz and eat less, right? So that I'm healthier and I don't die by the time I'm 50. We'll see how that goes. But I find that physical exercise is a really profound part of maintaining a mental balance. And look, public life is difficult. Public life is very difficult. It's very challenging. You do your best. You're never going to please everybody, of course. And for me, the stuff around Veterans Affairs is a calling. And there's lots to be done.
And I guess on the courses, I want to kind of find out how you got from where you are to where you are now. I mean, I know you had an unusual upbringing, not a million miles from me. I think you're Sussex, Eastbourne, is it East Sussex? One of a large family with an unusual upbringing. But what drew you to the military? Because I know you served for around 11 or 12 years, and I think 3 tours of Afghanistan. What drew you there from your background, which I'd say maybe a little bit unconventional, having no family members served before you necessarily. What made that happen?
Look, I mean, I definitely grew up in a fairly sort of complex environment when I was a boy. And for me, the military held a lot of attractiveness in terms of a new environment, in terms of playing sport, in terms of being in a community of active men and women, and the whole lifestyle and the camaraderie really attracted me. I mean, I wasn't one of those who dressed up as a soldier and, you know, went around playing soldiers and all the rest of it. I mean, the idea for me was to join up, have a really good time, and then leave before we went fighting or anything like that. But 9/11 happened when I went through training, and obviously that changed what it meant to be in the military for people like me, in particular in my trade, which was terminal controlling of indirect weapon systems. So it became very technical. You know, we used to just have guns and so on. Now we've got missiles and bombs and helicopters and jets and all the rest of it. And I was responsible for the sort of target end work on that. Ended up serving in 2006, 2008 to 9, and then 2010 as well. Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
And how did married life happen? Is that post or during or pre?
During, really. I mean, you never know when you're going to meet your wife, do you? Yeah, it was just before my last tour, and my last tour was probably the most difficult as well. So obviously a fairly chaotic time, right? And I know that a lot of service families and veterans will, understand the sort of pressures and stress you go through. I mean, we're not unique, my wife and I, in that respect. But yeah, we had children and then got married and just had another baby who's 2, and you know, you do your best, don't you? But it's 3 kids, 3 young children. My wife's a bit of a superstar and keeps all that stuff in check.
Well, I'm guessing she's been used to being, not absent's the wrong word, but working away, whether it be in the military, whether it be in Parliament. And I know you've had an interesting few years in politics. Is that the right word of saying it? A sort of up and down career in politics, I suppose, but we could come to that a little bit later. But I wanted to sort of dial into a particular event. I know it's been a bit of a life changer to you, and if I can take you back to the 8th of June 2010 and Mark Chandler, and I wanted to talk to you about that particular operation. What happened, how it happened, how you felt, what impact that had on you. Because we had a similar experience when our son James died in October 2013. And I don't think, I may be wrong, you might correct me here, when you're physically in that event and when it's happening, I can imagine it's a very strange experience to what we find thousands of miles away when we get those sort of knocks on the door, and how that really has an impact on the rest of my life. It's literally changed in that heartbeat, really. And I can track it back to September the 11th. It's when my life changed, because it was ultimately as a result of that James found his way to Afghanistan all those years later. And he was just a youngster at the time that it happened. So what happened? How did it happen? How did that feel? What was your relationship then with Mark's parents? So I think both have sadly since passed away. So what sort of an impact does that have on you, I guess, even to this day, and how do you sort of process that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, first, it's a massive question. I mean, the first thing I'd say is pay tribute to James. People like me are the lucky ones, really, who came home from that conflict largely in one piece. It was certainly a sort of life-defining time. I think, if you think that period before and after 2006 to 2010, when we were really wading through difficult times, I remember joining an army that hadn't really been involved in that stuff, right? And so it was all about Northern Ireland and counting rounds in Northern Ireland, and suddenly we found ourselves in this environment where we were. It's not that we were unprepared. It's just nothing, I think, really prepares you for the total chaos of operating in small teams, in contact with the enemy twice a day for 7 months, and particularly on the 2010 tour. I was in a patrol base that had just been built, so it was the first summer in that patrol base, and obviously they weren't massively keen, the old Talibs, on patrol bases, and so they would kind of leave you be until the harvest happened. They'd harvest all their crop, and literally that night all hell broke loose. And this went on for months and months, to the point where, they were like trying to jump over the wire on a Sunday morning, and you're fighting them in your pants and your body armor. So, I mean, that's the sort of context of the environment you're in. I mean, what actually happened that morning was another standard patrol. I went on patrol twice a day for 7 months. I was a fires controller. I had a small team with me of four people. One of them left pretty early doors. It wasn't really for him. Then there was myself, a guy called Lance Baldwin, Mark Chandler, and a guy called Baz Barrett. And basically, they were kind of specialists. So Baz was JTAC, he did the air. Mark did mortars and artillery, and I was the sort of junior officer in charge of the team. I would speak to the ground commander, ask for whatever effect it was they wanted, and I would try and deliver that. And yeah, we would go on a patrol, and often I'd be patrolling with junior soldiers, so corporals or sergeants who'd be the ground commander, and I'd just be in charge of the fires. On this particular day, just a standard patrol, pushed into an area called the Jungle, which is 31 West, which is it was kind of the heart of darkness at that time. Pushed in, pretty standard. And we heard, obviously you have ICOM chatter, which is basically insurgents talking on radios that you can intercept and listen to. And we reckon we knew roughly where they were, and they were going to whack us on our way back out. So we were going to get in the house and kill them first. And as we were closing with that enemy position, we were engaged at pretty close quarters, and I was with Mark at the time, Mark Chandler, and both me and him were crossing a track, and we were engaged, and he was shot in the face. And obviously when that happens, all hell breaks loose. They try and encircle you, they try and cut you off, and you've really got to kind of earn your pay as a junior officer. We had to kind of like fighting evacuation, fighting Kazivac, trying to make sure that we weren't cut off, and we weren't surrounded. A very difficult day, all the while dealing with the trauma of Mark dying. So look, you're facing, so that's the context and that's the specifics of it. How does it make you feel? Look, I mean, you're a young guy, right? So it's easier to deal with this stuff, I think, when you're younger. For me, the dynamic always changed when I had children. So on one of my last tour, I had children by the time I went on that tour. And that definitely changed the dynamic. It's very, very frightening. It's very frightening. It can be confusing, but you can kind of keep a lid on that by your own actions. For me, I mean, I was a young man, right? And there was an element of it that I thought was awesome. The kind of leveling up that combat brings, right? So rank is just irrelevant. It's like a piece of embroidery. It's literally all about the character of the man. And I love environments like that because they're very honest. So there's an aspect of me that absolutely loved it, and I went through those years, and there were times that I loved it. And that's why I joined the military, and we shouldn't be afraid of that, right? And shouldn't run away from it. There's nothing wrong with that. But obviously that defined my life, really. I never expected I'd become what I am today in terms of, the UK's first cabinet minister for veterans, set up the Office for Veterans Affairs, design all these programs, shape UK veterans provision for the longer term. I never thought that would be me. It's just, I really struggled, I guess, when I was out there. I struggled between, the difference between politicians who would come out and, say nice things, but ultimately you were like gaffer taping Kevlar plates to a Wimmick. And then for me, it really hit home when you got home, right? And some of their care, particularly the guys with prosthetics, was really, really bad. There were no dedicated mental health care pathways. The way some of the families got treated, writing to fathers and spelling their kid's name wrong. I mean, your lawyer fell asleep in your inquest, right? For me, there was a massive gap between where the MOD and the government was and the British people were when it came to how we felt about these people who sacrificed so much for the freedoms and privileges we enjoy. And in 2012, actually, I was taking the commando course at the moment, so people who wanted to be commandos and join my regiment. And during that year, more veterans killed themselves than were killed in the conflict. And there's a particular case of a guy called Dan Collins, who took himself up to Senny Bridge in Wales, where we do all that training, miserable place, horrible place. And he made a video for his mum just before he died. And he sort of looked into the camera and he was like, I'm so sorry. He knew the pain he was going to cause, right? I'm so sorry. There's just like nowhere to go. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to change it. I'm going to change the country. And it's like a mad ambition, right? And I've just been riding this massive, it's ridiculous. I have huge imposter syndrome. The idea I'm doing this is ridiculous. But we've made massive progress. I came in 2015, gave my speech. I talked about people like you, who's, in my view, given the greatest sacrifice on the altar of this nation's freedom. To lose your son or daughter as the result of a political decision, because these are not wars where they're in the channel, right? These are political choices. And to lose your son or daughter as a result of that is a pain that I could not comprehend. And I am absolutely determined that we will treat people like you and the families of the wounded and injured in a way that they deserve. And that has driven everything I've done. So look, I'm not I never voted before as an MP. I'm not like a die-hard politician type chap. But I am absolutely determined this country will do better and the government will do better when it comes to looking after families like yours and those who are seriously injured. And to be fair, you're right, it's been a really turbulent year, right? But if you look at the strategic progress we've made, we established the UK's first Office for Veterans Affairs. The idea that the Veterans Minister would be in the Cabinet and report directly to the Prime Minister, all this stuff just didn't happen. And then the knock-on effects from that, designing things like Op Courage, Op Fortitude, I was doing the Veterans Trauma Network today. We've done some really great stuff. So, of course, there's further to go. But I do know that the experiences of, certainly that I experienced in 2006 and, my friends, that will never happen again, and that's why I get up and go to work every day, right?
Thank you, Johnny. I think it's it's a really difficult one for us because as the families, if you like, we fall in between the cracks a little bit sometimes because we are a military family, but we're not a military family any longer. We're obviously not veterans. And many moons ago, I sort of thought to myself, I'd love to do something as well, but where on earth do you start with these things, to provide something for the families? Because when you look at nations like the States where they have the Gold Star families, I think it has a great impact on the society because, on Remembrance Day, people are clapping us, but the following day we're just normal people who fall victims to road rage or people bumping into you in Tesco as if you don't exist, and that sometimes makes it sound like people should bow down, and that's not what I'm saying. But sometimes I think the greatest thing that we lose is a purpose particularly when you lose a child unexpectedly, which obviously combat is, although I often say to people, obviously there's always a risk and we understand that, but there's never really a comprehension that we would ever lose James. But you do lose a purpose almost instantly. Everything I've ever worked for, we had James, I was 18, and Sharon, who's my wife, was 17. We've had them since we were teenage children. We had Yasmin when we were 20, so our life has always been built around having children. And as I got to older, I was 41 when James died and Sharon was 40. It's that life has just begun sort of thing. So we sacrificed our teens and early 20s. We didn't go on holiday. We had no money. We lived in a caravan for the first few years. So when we lost James, we lost a huge part of our lives, and it impacts every single day. And it's had a massive impact, not just on us, but also on our daughter. I think one of the things that often gets forgotten is that sort of sibling loss. Yasmin joined the army after James died. She joined the Royal Army Medical Corps, and she really changed her life. Totally changed. She was in retail, She joined the army. She left the army. She then went into professional sport. She's now got a master's degree in osteopathy. So it completely changed her life, and it's changed our lives. But it's that loss of purpose, which is, it's still something that I sort of struggle with, because we have all these incredible experiences, most of which are very, very challenging and difficult, but you don't know what to do with them, and you don't know where to go with them, because, as I say, sometimes you often feel that you sort of fall through the cracks as the families, which is obviously something that you're looking to change, which huge thanks to you on that. And I do recall, he was a Welsh guard, wasn't he, Dan Collins, and I do recall that happening, and the video for his mum, and it truly is heartbreaking. I think it's well known in the Falklands, more have taken their lives since the Falklands that died in combat during the Falklands, and I'm sure it'll be the same of most conflicts that will happen ever since, and there is a duty of care to those veterans. But again, sometimes I guess as the families, we kind of feel a little bit lost, and not left out's the wrong word, but it is very challenging where you go. And with the fall of Afghanistan recently, obviously that had a huge impact again on guys like yourself that have served out there, the veteran community, but a massive impact on us as the families, because that question always comes back, and it's not even so much through us, it's from other people. It's like, was it worth it? It wasn't worth it. And of course, that's a really churlish thing to say, in my opinion, because whilst it wasn't worth our individual sacrifice and the sacrifice of those who've been hugely impacted, it made a massive change, albeit for a relatively short period of time, in an area of the world that was really a really difficult place to be. And I think it had a huge impact on the Afghani people. I mean, all you have to do is look now at what's happening since the Taliban took back control in terms of females and all the other bits and bobs. So it's hugely challenging. So, and I think also now that the campaigns, obviously we're no longer in Iraq or Afghanistan, people forget very quickly, and it becomes just a sort of part of old history. So people do forget that there's still people that are looking to cope with these things. And I think there's probably been a huge impact on some of the military charities in terms of the donations they've received. Charities like Help for Heroes, who kind of shot to prominence during the campaigns in the Middle East, I'm guessing now are finding it very difficult to get funding. So in terms of the government side of things, what's the sort of future? I know you've spoken about Op Courage and Op Fortitude, which has just been released to try and help on the homeless veteran sort of side of things. But what's your long-term goal, legacy? Where do you want us to be with that? Do you want us to look at countries like New Zealand and Australia and the States and be sort of more in line with that kind of care? Because a lot of the charities and the churches pick up a lot of the slack with a lot of the stuff that needs to be picked up, rather than maybe government. And obviously with the huge challenges on government in terms of the finances, where do you think we're likely to go with that, in all honesty? Because everything is hugely challenging at the moment.
I deal with a lot of families who lost people out there because they really struggle to contextualize it and to answer that question. Like, when you talk about devoting your entire lives as young parents to your children, that's what I did, right? That's what I've done. And I can't even cope with the thought of that, yet alone what has happened. What I would say to the families of those who died, though, was that it's not a waste, right? It's not a waste. What I saw people do out there, like it's kind of an amphitheatre of humanity, right? So you see the really bad parts. Like I saw this guy beat another bloke to death with a spade over a bloody field, right? I had a guy come in one day, hand me a bloody rag, and it was his baby daughter who'd fallen off his motorbike. He just did not give a shit. And then you had these people operating in the military who just demonstrated the most selfless, courageous, honest behavior that humans can do. And you know, you spend your whole life trying to do that, right? What do you want to be? You want to be a good person. You want to think of other people. You want to be courageous. And these guys are at the zenith of those human qualities. And that's where it came to the fore, right? It's sometimes easy to be courageous and kind in the UK. You know, buy someone at McDonald's who's sleeping rough or whatever. What about taking the Valen off him and going and doing 300 meters on the Vallon because he just can't take it anymore. Right? That's courage, and that's friendship, and that's camaraderie, and that's the kind of zenith of the human existence. And it was not a waste, because James got to operate in that environment, and it had a profound and lifelong effect on people like me, and drives me to this day. Right? Why do I do what I do? Because I think these people are incredible, and they're the best of the nation. And I think the nation owes them better. That's why I do what I do. You can't control international events. You cannot control what happens in Afghanistan. We could control at the time, okay, after 9/11. And we removed the Taliban. We then went in, 2006, pushed down into Helmand. We did provide for 20 years a semblance of normality. And there will be a generation of people in Afghanistan who had that experience, for whom hopefully there's that kernel of hope that they will get through this period and that time might return. What do I want it to be like in this country? I don't really want it to be like America or Australia or New Zealand. I want to take all the best practice from all of these countries and deliver it here in the UK, right? So are we ever going to get to a stage where people stand up and clap veterans on the plane first? No, because we don't want to do that, right? Well, that's not in our culture. It makes people like me feel incredibly uneasy. But are we going to get to a place where we stop talking about how much we're doing for veterans and veterans this and that, and actually ask, well, what is it like to be a veteran in the UK today? Right? So you hear of all these brilliant programs, but you've left the military, you're 5 years out, you don't have any mates who are officers, you start hitting problems. What's it like for you to be a veteran? How do you access up courage? How do you access up fortitude? And then conversely, what does it feel like to be a family or a dad like you of someone who died in that conflict? What does it genuinely feel like every year? And that's what I want to change. And I'll be honest, I'm behind the curve where I want to be with families. Right? I have ideas in that space. I'd like to write to every family every year. If only just to say we don't forget, right? We don't forget. You've sacrificed for the nation, and every day your kid is not there. Every day. Or, write to a wife, your husband, every morning he's not there at breakfast. And as Prime Minister or whatever it may be, I respect that and we're grateful for your service. Things like that I would like to do. But as you can imagine, we start from a really low base, and I'm doing everything I can to catch up.
Yeah, and I think it's often the little things like that make a huge difference, because, it's 9 years, it'll be 10 years since we lost James in October. And obviously, James is, everyone that we knew has moved on, has retired, has just gone back round, and you do lose track with the various regiments and the chain of command, and they don't even necessarily know about James in our case, or whoever it happens to be. But the one consistent is obviously people like yourselves, hopefully, or government, and I think something like that would make a huge difference. We get a card from a charity called Forces Support around Remembrance, and it's just nice because they send a card thinking about you, that sort of thing, and it makes a big difference, because people don't, the general population don't, and I didn't either until we lost James. They don't have an empathy about what it is and what it feels like, and you're right, it's every single day. And I truly know that I was having this discussion at the Remembrance thing. We were fortunate to have a colleague of James's, Dan, accompany us, and I said, I know without any question that if James had have known he was going to die on that operation, he still would have gone, and he wouldn't have changed the way he operated. And that's exactly what you were saying. And it sounds, I was reading some bits and pieces around Mark before we spoke, and they're saying a similar sort of characters. I know you wrote about him that he was incredibly selfless and he'd volunteered to put the bins out as well as he would to go on a patrol. And that's exactly the same with James. The things that we've heard back from various colleagues, somebody helped someone pick up stones in the car park as punishment, which wasn't his punishment, but he just didn't want the guy to be doing it on his own. That sort of side of things, and they truly are the greatest, in my opinion, of our nation, and they represent such strong character and integrity and all of these things that I think maybe aren't so prevalent in today's society. So in terms of your side, obviously, because it's been, the last couple of years have been difficult with the ministerial position, almost like the Jose Mourinho sort of thing. You're there and not there, and there and not there. So for people like us, how does that work? So if for example, in the next election, the current government gets replaced by someone, does that mean that you will be replaced? Or
Yeah, it does. I mean, how do you deal with it? The way I've always dealt with it, and first couple of years I was in politics, I found it pretty difficult. But you just got to remember who you're here for, right? So I'm here for people like you. I'm here for, the communities at Plymouth and the veterans and service family community that I've made very clear all along. And I think the key is just to be consistent, right? Just be consistent. So politics is very fickle. The tide, the crowd, it's very fickle, right? And all you can control is yourself. And it comes back to like the people we served with, the character of these individuals. It all comes down to character. And you've just got to be consistent so that when the tide does turn and you are reappointed, for example, as has happened to me, people know that your values and your character and your what you're there for doesn't change. And I think because ultimately I'm not here for myself, right? I'm not in this for myself. Politics is not a good sport, right? I'm away from the family all the time. People will say horrible things about me. You can't make everyone happy. Awful, right? But I'm not in it for myself, so I don't really care about that, right? I'm in it because I care what people like you think, what the seriously injured veterans think, what people in Plymouth think, and you just got to focus on that, right? And keep your bearings on that, and just do your best. And there are forces well outside your control. Yeah. You can't do anything about.
In your position with the background that you have, do you think there's sometimes a danger just picking up on something that you're almost too emotionally involved, so it becomes it drives every single part of your being? Because obviously, as you say, being an MP is hard enough as it is, but being the veterans or the first veterans minister adds that complexity to it. So with that emotional commitment that you have, which is huge, because it's not just a job to you, it's almost like a vocation. I mean, I'm guessing that in the recent reshuffling of bits and bobs, when you were, whatever the words, I don't like to use the S word, but when you were relieved of your
you
position,
can say it, matey.
I don't. Yeah, but
you sacked twice. I'm getting used to it.
It's a horrible word. I hate it. So, but when that happened, the impact that must have had on you would be beyond what it would be for other ministers, let's say.
Yeah, and that's completely fair, right? And that's double-edged, because in some ways I should take it better, right? And that's my fault, and I take responsibility for that. On the other hand, it makes my job easier, right? Because like I said before, it's because you're not in it for yourself. You're in it for other people. What I've found is that you will kind of go further, right? And you will ask for more, and you'll keep pushing and keep driving, because you're not doing it for yourself. If you're doing it for yourself, like when you're in the military doing an arduous course, and you push yourself, you're doing it for yourself, you can go quite a lot further than you think you can. What I've worked out is when you're doing it for other people, you can go even further, because you just don't care about the impact it has on you. And in what I've had to do in the veteran space, I found that quite helpful.
Okay, yeah, because the veteran community can be difficult, can be challenging. Obviously,
Mate, the veterans community is extremely difficult at times.
Yeah.
But the broad body, I must say, the broad body is fantastic, right? Mm. You will always get your outliers. And some of them will be very damaged and very vulnerable. So you've got to be careful how you pick around it. But
Johnny, thank you very much.
Mate, it's a pleasure. And look, you're a hero. I can't imagine what you've been through. You're the reason I get out of bed every day. So you've got to stay in touch and keep us on the straight and narrow, okay?
100%, don't you worry about that. We will do. Thank you. Really do appreciate it, mate.